When I talk about men abusing women, people, mostly men, they rush in with words like she's sexist or biased or misandrist, as if those labels are supposed to end my conversation. You've been told before that naming abuse and harm makes you unfair or dramatic or hateful, right? You've been told that your reaction, your speaking out, that's the actual problem. Now, if there's something really interesting about this reaction that kind of mirrors what happens inside abusive relationships, right? Where the focus shifts off the behavior and onto your tone or your motives or your character. So I want to explain why I actually stopped talking about abuse in gender neutral terms and why I will never go back. Why I focus specifically on female victims of abuse and male perpetrators. And I'm not speaking from a distance here. I have lived in an abusive relationship. I know exactly how much self-doubt it can create. I've also spent years working with women who've lived through all of the emotional, psychological, sexual, and coercive abuse by men. And I hear the same behaviors described again and again, even when the details change. Yelling is stress and control. It gets framed back to us as concern, right? They're just concerned about you. The list goes on. And this isn't something that I picked up from one book or one comment section. This lines up with what abuse researchers and educators have been documenting for decades. People like Lundy Bancroft and Don Hennessy and Chuck Derry and Evan Stark and more who have been very clear about how male-patterned abuse operates. So when I speak about this, it's not casual, and I'm not speaking in theory. It is lived, observed, studied, and it's reinforced by the work of people who have studied this across time and across cultures. If this kind of really clear language is going to help you feel less confused or less alone, that's probably a sign that this space is for you. So hit subscribe if you want to stay here because I built this channel intentionally for women who are done doubting their own reality, who are just exhausted by feeling stuck in abusive and toxic relationships, or women who've left and just never want to repeat this nightmare again. Now, here's something that I don't think people really realize unless they have actually watched this up close. I didn't always speak this way and this directly about men's abuse of women. Maybe it would surprise a lot of you to know, especially if you're new here, that for a long time, I actually made gender neutral content on purpose. I was all about the hashtag abuse knows no gender. I used it all the time. I still have a playlist on my TikTok called Female Perpetrators. I talked about abusive behavior without naming gender. I addressed female perpetrators semi-regularly, very specifically. And I tried very hard, actually, to keep the language really broad so that nobody could accuse me of targeting men. And guess what happened? I was accused of targeting men, right? Knowing what I know now, very unsurprisingly, men still showed up in my comments calling me names and mocking survivors, mocking me, accusing me of lying, telling me that I hated men anyway. And they did this even when my content wasn't centered on them at all. And I noticed that when I make videos about male abusers, men are screaming in the comment sections, women do it too. And when I make content about female perpetrators, no women are whining in the comments that men do it too. I know why. This is my opinion, of course. Men just, God, they need to be centered at all times, right? Otherwise, if you don't center them, you hate them, right? It's interesting. Not centering them is hating them. Because misogyny is just like a different kind of hate, right? That's the actual abuse and harm and unaliving of women constantly. Meanwhile, at the same time, women were still the ones living with the consequences of abuse in their houses, their marriages, and their families. But this is all when something became really clear to me. Neutrality is not protecting women, right? It wasn't stopping abuse. It was forcing women to keep translating their pain into language that feels safer for men to hear. That didn't sit right with me at all once I faced it. I can't ignore the numbers, and I'm not going to be one of those weird-ass people who pretends that gender-based violence has no gender. It's almost like they call it gender-based violence for a reason. So I want to say this part super clear because this is always the thing that comes up in the moment when women start naming male violence without cushioning it nice and soft for men. Someone's going to rush in and say, women do it too, or abuse is bad no matter who does it. Why do we have to make it about gender? I mean, I wish we didn't have to make it about gender, right? But the response that people have, they're not really here concerned with accuracy, right? What they want to do is they want to stop a conversation going from where it's going. They want to shift the focus from a pattern to the exceptions because they like the exceptions. That feels safer. So once the conversation is about the exceptions, nothing changes. And that move shows up every single time women get close to naming reality and pretending that it's neutral or well-intentioned. It doesn't make it less effective. It makes it harder to call out. Neutrality sounds really fair on the surface, right? A lot of people try to do this like false equivalency, but it's just not how it is. Abuse is bad no matter which gender commits it. Yes, right? That's true, obviously. But in practice, it creates the false equivalency. And I have a real peeve with logical fallacies because when we say things like, well, abuse is bad no matter who does it, but we don't name who's doing it, most often and why, we erase the context and pattern. And when you erase the pattern, you're never going to get to the root of the problem. Violence against women is a globally recognized epidemic. That's not my opinion. You can look at global data across countries, across cultures. Around 90% of severe intimate partner violence is committed by men against women. The World Health Organization has been naming this for years. We have been screaming this from the rooftops. So have criminologists and sociologists who studied gendered violence. So pretending that abuse shows up evenly across genders doesn't make the conversation fairer. It makes it less accurate and definitely less useful. So if the goal is to actually reduce harm, then you have to understand who's committing it, how often, and what beliefs are driving it. Neutral language that hides reality does not protect victims of any gender. It protects the conditions that allow abuse to continue. And I don't know what to tell you other than I can't do it. I can't do it. That's not me. Now, this is where people are going to throw the words like biased and prejudiced and sexism and misandry. And honestly, it actually matters that we slow this down for a second. Let's just take a deep breath and let's cover what these words mean. You might think you know, but hear me out. You can't call me these things and not know their meanings because, to be fair, you look foolish. You look foolish. And let's save yourself the humiliation of using words that you don't understand. Bias means a preconceived judgment, right, that prevents fair evaluation. Prejudice means forming opinions without regard to evidence. Sexism involves assumptions of superiority or inferiority based on sex, right? Misandry would mean hostility towards men as a group, regardless of behavior. Do I hate abusive men? Yeah, I do. I do hate abusive men. If I were saying men abuse because they are men, or that men are inherently inferior or dangerous, those words would apply. I don't think it's inherent. I think it's socialized and conditioned. But what's ironic is that I actually think men are highly capable of emotional regulation, being kind. I believe that men can be in healthy relationships and contribute. It's weird because it's actually men constantly telling me that they disagree with that. And frankly, I maintain that I disagree. Not all men, am I right? If I were dismissing male victims or denying their humanity, those labels might fit, sure. But that's what those words actually describe. Naming a documented pattern of actual behavior supported by evidence and lived experience does not become prejudice because it makes some men uncomfortable. Too many men struggle with accountability. I know we always say women struggle with that, but let's be honest. Focusing on where harm is concentrated is not the same thing as hating a group. And conflating those two things is a way to just shut down conversations that actually threaten the status quo. So why do you want the status quo so much? This tactic works precisely because women have been trained to take accusations like that seriously. And me? I don't care anymore. That doesn't work on me. Those comments that men have left are the thing that led me to stop making content for men. So for the men that whined in my comment sections for years, hoping that one day I would start making content for men, you're what made me stop. What I'm doing is talking very plainly about behavior. Yelling, name-calling, intimidation, coercion, emotional punishment, sexual pressure, financial control. And these behaviors don't appear out of nowhere. They don't float evenly across genders, right? I don't want to hear about underreporting. I have other videos that I strongly suggest you watch that actually talks about that. Watch the video that I made called Why Women Abuse Men to learn more about exactly this, because I don't want to get off topic here, okay? This abuse, it is enacted by individuals who believe that they're entitled to power over someone else. Women can be abusive, I know. But hey, researchers on male socialization and entitlement have been writing about this for decades. Lundy Bancroft talks about how abusive men feel justified, not out of control. And Evan Stark explains how coercive control operates as a system, not some moment of anger. Chuck Derry talks about how these attitudes are shaped from young boys. When someone hears this and responds by saying, women know it too, you're not adding anything useful to the conversation. You're changing the subject. And this move doesn't challenge the pattern of what's happening, it avoids it. And avoidance is one of the main ways that abuse stays unnamed and therefore continues. And there's another piece here that really matters, especially if you've been accused of having the wrong motives for speaking up. When people say that I chose this niche because I hate men, my God, it mirrors exactly what happens to victims when they speak out, right? Women are told that they accused him because he's rich, because they're bitter, because they want attention, because they want revenge. The goal is always the same. Discredit the woman so nobody looks at the behavior of the man. The amount of times someone asks me what my credentials are, which, by the way, are listed on my website, but like, what credentials do you think I need to have been beaten by my partner and then say I was beaten by my partner? I don't need a PhD to know that over 90% of perpetrators are male. I can read. It's quite simple. I know more about how to read and interpret a study than any troll in my comment section misquoting stats about lesbians and domestic violence, I'll tell you that. Discrediting women is a move that shows up inside abusive relationships and outside them, and it's so consistent and so aggravating because it shifts the focus from evidence to intent, from harm to character, and it works because women are already socialized to worry about being seen as fair and kind and reasonable. But once you let go of caring what a man thinks of you, I have to tell you, ladies, it's amazing. I highly recommend it. Once you notice this parallel, it gets really hard to internalize all of these accusations. They stop feeling personal, right? It starts to feel very familiar. They roll off my back these days. Familiar patterns lose their power when you can name them clearly. I also want to be very clear about something that gets overlooked all the time. There's no personal benefit for me in choosing to speak directly to women about men's abuse. This choice came with a cost, not a reward. I receive harassment, bullying, abuse from men daily. I get called names in my comments, threatening emails, DMs. I've received death threats. I've had people try to find where I live. A guy once made a video about me. His name was Alex. And some people, if you're on TikTok, you might have seen this, triggered hundreds of threats over 3 days, blowing up my social platforms. They wanted me quiet. It made me louder. It's not an exaggeration. None of this is rare, right? Neutral content was quieter and safer. I walked away from it anyway. That matters because bias actually implies payoff. Prejudice implies that I have something to gain from it. I didn't gain anything. Choosing a path that brings constant hostility and threats doesn't fit into your little story about why women do this. Women don't speak out about abuse because it benefits them. My God, they speak because staying silent costs too much. And there's this idea floating around that what's happening right now is this gender war. And I want to be clear about where I stand on that. There is no gender war. What are you talking about? A war has this implication that there's two sides attacking each other, mutual hostility. That's not what this is. What's happening is that women are naming harm, the harm that's been happening for forever. We're saying what men do in real life out loud. We're setting boundaries. We're refusing to keep swallowing all the damage. And I know that a lot of these men feel very threatened, right? They relied on our silence. So accountability is being mislabeled as aggression because male comfort used to be the default. And anything that disrupts that feels really hostile, but only to the people who benefited from it. So when you call it a gender war, that's just a way to sort of flatten the power dynamics and pretend that this is about hurt feelings instead of harm. That's crazy. That's why you hear so many women say misandry hurts men's feelings and misogyny kills and harms women. Calling this a gender war turns this conversation about violence and control and inequality into some little personality conflict between men and women. But that framing, it's so convenient because it removes responsibility and it replaces it with drama. But that's just a word used to discredit women. And this isn't women versus men. This is reality versus denial. And denial always gets louder right before it loses its ground. I'm a feminist, and I'm a feminist for so many reasons. One is that I care about men and I believe in good men. I want better for men. I'm not going to do it for you, but there's no cruelty required to tell the truth as much as they want to position it that way. There's no hatred involved in just refusing to center men in conversations about women's survival. There's no obligation for you or me to keep questioning our own sanity and understanding to make someone else more comfortable, especially men. Hit subscribe. Neutrality is not going to protect you. Didn't protect anyone else either. Naming patterns doesn't make you hateful and it doesn't make you unfair. It makes you honest. And if at some point you want support, whether that's private sessions or group programs or my She Rises Collective community membership, those are options that you have that are there from you if and when you want them. And I'll see you in the next video.